I pulled into the driveway of Tristan's house, heart swelling with excitement to surprise my sweet grandson Eli on his 8th birthday. Little did I know the surprise would be entirely mine, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. The doorbell went unanswered after several rings, so I tried the handle. Unlocked. "Hello? Tristan? Nadia?" I called out, letting myself inside. An eerie silence blanketed the house, normally filled with the laughter and pitter-patter of little feet. A muffled whimper drew me towards the staircase. Under the stairs, a small door caught my eye, the kind meant for storage, not for... No, the thought was too horrifying to entertain. "Eli? Honey, are you in there?" I gasped, chest tightening. "Grandma?" His tiny voice trembled from behind the door. "Help me, please." With shaking hands, I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, each more disturbing than the next. I steadied myself against the wall, guilt and dread crashing over me in waves for not visiting sooner. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a toolbox and grabbed a hammer, my fragile grasp on composure crumbling. "Stand back, sweetie." 3 solid strikes, and the flimsy door splintered open. There he was, my beautiful grandson, cowering in the dimly lit space, eyes wide with fear and relief. Tears stained his pale cheeks, his vibrant red hair matted and unkempt. "Oh, Eli." I choked out, scooping him into my arms, cradling him close. He clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart into pieces. I'm so sorry, I mumbled into his hair, cursing myself for 1,000 should-haves and could-haves. His small body trembled like a leaf against me. Once the initial shock subsided, a burning rage replaced the sorrow. How could Tristan and Nadia do this? What kind of parents? No, what kind of human beings? "It's okay, honey, you're safe now," I assured him, doing my best to keep my tone even and soothing, despite the maelstrom within. "Can you tell me how long?" He shook his head fiercely, eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memories. "Too long. Days, I think. I'd yell and bang, but they never came. Just slid food under sometimes." White-hot fury coursed through my veins, and I silently vowed to ensure Tristan and Nadia paid for this unforgivable cruelty towards their own flesh and blood. But first, I needed to get Eli out of this house of horrors. "Pack a bag. Anything you want to take with you. We're leaving." My tone brooked no argument. He nodded obediently, looking smaller and frailer than any child should. By the time I'd calmed down enough to call Tristan, the rage had crystallized into a cold, hard knot of determination in my gut. He picked up after several rings, utterly nonchalant, like he hadn't just committed one of the worst betrayals a parent could. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" Those 3 words, spoken so casually, were the spark that ignited my fury into an inferno. "What do you mean, what's up?" I snarled into the phone, my fury simmering just below the surface. "I'm at your house, and I just found Eli locked in a closet under the stairs." There was a brief pause, and I could practically see Tristan's nonchalant shrug through the phone. "So? That's just how we discipline him when he misbehaves. He knows the rules." My jaw dropped, revulsion churning in my gut. How could he be so callous about treating his own son like a prisoner? "You can't be serious, Tristan. He's just a little boy. Don't you dare try to tell me how to parent my own kid, Mom." His voice took on an unpleasant edge. "You're overreacting as usual. He's fine, just throwing one of his tantrums." "Overreacting? You locked your 8-year-old child in a cramped, dark space for days with barely any food or human contact. What's wrong with you?" I was practically shouting now, anger and disbelief warring within me. "We have it under control," he said with an infuriating calmness that made my blood boil. "This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it." I opened my mouth to unleash another verbal lashing, but the dial tone cut me off. He'd hung up. Chest heaving, I stared at my trembling hands as a chilling realization crept over me. This was no one-time disciplinary tactic gone too far. The way Tristan had spoken, so coldly and matter-of-fact, hinted at something much more sinister. An ingrained pattern of cruelty, of depriving an innocent child of his basic rights and needs. Shaking my head, I leaned back against the wall, fighting against the swell of nausea. How could my own son, my flesh and blood, be capable of such monstrous behavior? What kind of person had he become while I wasn't watching? Unbidden, memories flickered through my mind. Happy childhood moments, Tristan's bright smile and pealing laughter as we baked cookies or played in the yard. It felt like a lifetime ago, those echoes of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. Where had I gone wrong? What had warped and twisted him into this shell of a man? Or had the seeds of cruelty lurked beneath the surface all along, only to bloom once I looked away? A tiny sniffle made me jerk upright. Eli stood in the hallway, bag clutched to his chest, eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Of course, he'd overheard every ugly word. Crossing the room in 2 long strides, I gathered him into my arms, murmuring soft, soothing words into his hair. "It's gonna be okay, honey. I'm gonna make sure they never ever hurt you again." And in that moment, as his small arms wound around my neck, my path became clear. No more agonizing over where Tristan had strayed. It didn't matter now. He was beyond reach, beyond saving maybe. But Eli, that sweet, innocent little boy, still had a chance at a decent life. A life full of kindness, love, and stability that every child deserved. Even if it meant waging war against my own son, I would stop at nothing to rescue him from this nightmare. Settling Eli into the passenger seat, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you pick a movie for us to watch at my place? Something with happy endings." He nodded, mustering up a watery grin that tugged at my heart. In that moment, I made a silent vow. By the time we reached our happy ending, Tristan would face the consequences for his unforgivable crimes. No matter what it took, I would make sure of it. The drive back to my place was a blur, my mind spinning with half-formed plans of how to handle the situation with Tristan and Nadia. One thing was certain, I couldn't take them on alone. I needed allies. My first call was to Dale, my estranged husband. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, our marriage slowly eroding until the distance became a chasm. But he was still Eli's grandfather, and I had to hope some shred of paternal instinct remained. "Dale, it's Lorraine," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need your help with something." There was a pregnant pause, then a resigned sigh. "What is it this time?" Clenching my jaw, I willed myself to remain calm. "It's about Eli, our grandson." That seemed to get his attention. "Go on." The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush. Eli's captivity, Tristan's shocking dismissal of it all, my own fears for the boy's well-being. To his credit, Dale listened in stone-faced silence until I finally trailed off. "You're telling me our son had his own kid locked up, like some kind of prisoner?" His voice was dangerously low. "Yes." I glanced over at Eli, slumped against the window in an exhausted sleep. And judging by how casual Tristan was about it, I don't think this was the first time. Another heavy pause then. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. We'll have those 2 psychos arrested for child endangerment." "Wait," I cut him off sharply. As satisfying as that idea was, it felt too rash, too risky. "We can't go to the authorities until we have rock-solid proof. You know how the system can fail kids." "So what do you suggest?" My gaze settled on Eli's sleeping form, and a steely resolve solidified within me. "We need to investigate on our own first. Figure out exactly what's going on and gather evidence of any wrongdoing, so it's airtight." "You want us to perform a full background check on our own son?" Dale sounded skeptical. "On both of them," I clarified grimly. "There has to be some explanation for why they're treating Eli so horrendously. We find that, we'll get to the bottom of this whole mess." A heavy silence then. "Fine, but not because I care about that boy's welfare anymore." His voice dripped with disdain. "Just because he's my grandson, you know, bloodline and all that." I bristled at his callousness, but bit back a scathing retort. I'd deal with Dale's indifference towards Eli later. For now, I had to play along if I wanted a hope of gaining his help. "Okay then, we start digging into their lives first thing tomorrow. Finances, personal records, everything. No stone left unturned." Dale grunted in assent. "And if we find anything?" A burst of vindictive satisfaction surged through me. "Then we make them pay." The next few days passed by in a whirlwind of information gathering. Between my tenacious research skills and Dale's business connections, we slowly unpicked every tangled thread of Tristan and Nadia's lives. Their finances were in shambles, racked with debt and comic strings of bad investments. A large portion of debt seemed tied to Nadia's previous marriage, which ended messily and likely cost a small fortune in legal fees. Speaking of her ex, I made a point to track him down. The details he shared painted an ugly picture of Nadia's past: accusations of infidelity, substance abuse, even violence. Could she still be clinging to those toxic patterns? As for Tristan, there were signs of shady business dealings and despicable con artistry. Several former employers and partners had fallen victim to his schemes over the years. Had he been grooming Eli as his next payday? You think they've been stealing from the kid? Dale wondered grimly when I shared my suspicions. Seems like the type of lowlife move they'd pull. I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea crashing over me. The more I learned, the more monstrous my own son and daughter-in-law became. Raking a hand through my hair, I turned to face Dale with a look of grim determination. Well, we can't let them get away with it any longer. It's time we put an end to their sick games. With our findings laid out before us, Dale and I began plotting our next moves. We had more than enough damning evidence against Tristan and Nadia. Now it was a matter of using it effectively. We could release it all to the media, let them crucify those two jackals in the court of public opinion, Dale suggested with relish. I shook my head, worrying my bottom lip. As satisfying as that would be, we can't. Not yet. It would just put Eli in the crosshairs and make him the victim all over again. Then what? Take it to the cops like I originally suggested? Exhaling slowly, I considered our options. Going through official channels could mean months of legal red tape and he said, she said battles. Meanwhile, Eli would suffer. No, we needed a surefire way to take them down swiftly while securing his safety, a way to force their hand and back them into a corner with no escape. I have a friend, I began slowly. From law school, Martha Wilkins. She's made a career handling cases just like this one. Crooked parents trying to milk their kids' inheritance, neglect, you name it. Understanding dawned in Dale's eyes. So you'll get this hotshot lawyer lady to put the screws to Tristan and Nadia? Air all their dirty laundry in court? Among other things, I replied cryptically. Help me gather up all the paperwork. I'll set up a meeting with Martha for tomorrow. Martha's office was as sleek and professional as I remembered, though her warm smile and sharp eyes were the same as ever. Lorraine, it's been too long. She enveloped me in a brief hug before guiding us to a pair of leather chairs. Though I must say, I wish our reunion was under better circumstances. With a sigh, I waved a hand at the boxes of files surrounding us. That's an understatement. Take a look at what we've uncovered about my son and daughter-in-law. For the next 2 hours, Martha pored over our findings with her trademark meticulous intensity. Her brow furrowed deeper with each new layer of depravity revealed, the financial deceptions, signs of blatant neglect, even the account from Nadia's ex-husband. I've heard of money-grubbing parents before, she muttered, shaking her head in disgust. But keeping their own child as a literal prisoner in the name of fleecing his trust fund? That's a new low, even for me. Unconsciously, my fists clenched in my lap. So you'll take the case? Do everything in your power to make sure Tristan and Nadia face the consequences? You don't even need to ask. Martha's expression was one of grim resolve. I'll call in every favor I can to push this through the courts at top speed. We'll bury those two beneath an avalanche of evidence before they know what hit them. She leaned back, fixing me with an intent look. But I'll need your help, too. As Eli's closest living relatives, your testimony and cooperation will be instrumental. I met her gaze steadily. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that boy. A ghost of a smile played across Martha's lips. That's what I wanted to hear. Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and strategy sessions consumed every free moment. Martha was ruthlessly efficient, anticipating every possible angle of defense Tristan and Nadia might attempt. At her urging, I took steps to be appointed as Eli's legal guardian, should we wrest him from their custody. It was a lengthy, draining process, but I gladly endured it all with the goal of giving him a stable home in sight. When at last the court date arrived, armed with a veritable armory of evidence and flanked by Martha's wily paralegal team, I felt an odd sense of calm. The fireworks would come soon enough. Are you sure you want to do this today? Dale eyed me sidelong as we strode up the courthouse steps, Eli's small hand encased in mine. In front of the whole family, on his birthday of all days? My jaw set in a stubborn line. It has to be today. They've had this coming for too long. In truth, I'd chosen this date and venue very deliberately. Our entire extended clan would be gathered at Tristan and Nadia's place for Eli's 8th birthday party later. What better way to expose their sins against their own flesh and blood than surrounded by all those they'd deceived? I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the Negligent Parents of the Year award was theirs. Sure enough, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated with the rest of the family when we arrived, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. A tide of expectant murmurs washed over the crowd as the group recognized Martha striding in behind us. Nadia was the first to spot us, her perfectly curated smile slipping ever so slightly. "What's going on here?" Tristan rose to his feet, all artificial joviality. "I should be asking you three the same thing. What's with the hostility, Mom?" Draping a supportive arm around Eli's shoulders, I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. "Maybe you should ask your son about hostility." Confusion rippled through the assembled guests, but Nadia merely rolled her eyes in condescending amusement. "For God's sake, Lorraine, not this again." "Shut your mouth," Dale growled, and I started slightly at the venom in his tone. "You don't get to dismiss her concerns after the sick crap you two pulled." Murmurs intensified, tinged with disbelief and unease. Martha stepped forward, cool and unruffled, as she spread a series of damning dossiers across the table. "We have extensive documentation of your actions towards Elijah, including willful neglect, financial exploitation of his trust fund, and the unjustified deprivation of basic needs." She gestured for silence as shocked gasps erupted around the room. "I'll skip the niceties and give you one opportunity to start making amends. Full custody of the boy will be transferred to Mrs. Hawthorne here immediately, pending the court's final ruling. You'll also repay every cent you siphoned from his accounts." There was a beat of stunned silence as the words sank in. Twin looks of abject horror twisted Tristan and Nadia's faces before morphing into snares of rage. "You've got to be freaking kidding me." Tristan slammed his hands on the table, making several guests jump. "Just because Mom had some stupid delusions about our parenting? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Get off your high horses, both of you." Nadia jutted her chin haughtily, a studied mask of disdain falling into place to conceal her panic. "Our finances are none of your business, nor how we raise our son." My heart clenched at the way she refused to acknowledge Eli as her own. Martha arched an unimpressed eyebrow. "So I'll take that as a refusal to cooperate, then?" "You're damn right." Tristan looked about 2 seconds from vaulting over the table. "We don't have to listen to your self-righteous garbage." On the contrary. Another folder landed on the table with a thud, and the image of a familiar dingy room, harshly illuminated, filled the screen. "You'll find this garbage quite enlightening, I think." A collective gasp rang out through the room as the grim reality set in. Surveillance footage of the tiny closet space where Eli had been imprisoned for days. His tear-stained face and muffled cries were plain as day, surrounded by harsh shadows and stifling walls. Tristan went ashen, mouth working soundlessly as Nadia slumped against her seat, hand fluttering to her mouth. I ground my teeth, fighting back the urge to throttle them both then and there. How dare they look so appalled now, after willingly inflicting such cruel conditions on their own child? The outrage poured forth from our friends and relatives in waves of angry shouting that drowned out all my instincts for vengeance. Because in that moment, the devastated look in Eli's eyes was all I could focus on. He didn't deserve any of this ugly airing of family secrets and toxic legacy of betrayal that wasn't his shame to carry. At that moment, I was fiercely glad Martha had taken charge. Her pragmatic ruthlessness spared Eli from having to witness our blistering condemnations of the parents who had so grievously failed him. No, he'd been through enough ugliness. It was time to start looking towards a future of healing. Gathering his slight form against me, I murmured low reassurances into his hair as the chaos swirled around us. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, I realized with a surge of hope. A road towards redemption, away from this poisoned legacy of cruelty and neglect. Tristan and Nadia might have been battles lost, but the war for Eli's soul was just getting started. And this time, I was determined to win. The aftermath of our dramatic confrontation was a whirlwind that still makes my head spin in retrospect. Martha wasted no time, pressing her advantage with cold precision while Tristan and Nadia floundered. Within hours, emergency custody papers were signed and law enforcement was on the scene. Nadia dissolved into hysterics as they slapped cuffs on her wrists, shrieking invectives that would have made a sailor blush. Tristan, for his part, maintained a seething, sullen silence right up until they separated them for booking. Then the dam broke. Staring at me with undisguised loathing, he fought against the officer's restraints like a rabid dog. "You did this," he snarled, spittle flying. "You poisoned everything with your deluded vendetta." "Your actions poisoned this family," I shot back, unflinching even as Dale shifted protectively in front of Eli. "Maybe if you hadn't been so reckless with your son's well-being, so blind to anything but your greed." "He's not yours anymore," Tristan continued ranting, words slurring as his anger spiraled into near incoherency. "You don't get to sweep in and play hero after years of being a lousy, inattentive gur." The backhanded blow caught him square across the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a meaty thwack. Even the officers gave Dale a wide berth as he towered over Tristan's crumpled form, chest heaving like a bellows. "Don't you dare talk about what kind of grandparent she is," he growled through gritted teeth. "When your own twisted minds led you to torment an innocent child for money." Silence fell, heavy as a pall. Tristan glared up at his father through a mask of bloody spittle and swelling flesh, the fight temporarily beaten out of him. With a last contemptuous sneer, Dale shouldered past the stunned officers and came to collect Eli and me. "You did the right thing," he murmured gruffly into my hair as we embraced, the closest to affection he could muster in that moment. "That boy's better off with anyone but those two excuses for human beings." I squeezed him fiercely, the adrenaline high from the confrontation, rapidly waning to leave me drained, yet perversely buoyed by our victory. It was done. Eli was finally truly safe. All that remained was ensuring he got the love and care he deserved going forward. And that, I silently vowed, was a battle I would fight with every last breath. With the initial crisis resolved, a strange sort of limbo settled over us in the following weeks. Though the custody papers granted me temporary guardianship of Eli, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. I lost track of how many legal meetings, court dates, and blistering cross-examinations Martha put us through. Every shred of Tristan and Nadia's elaborate tangle of lies was meticulously unpicked, cauterized, and readied as exhibits. The fraud charges alone were damning, given the paper trail of diverted funds from Eli's trust account. But Martha assured me that the abuse charges, locking him away for days at a time, withholding food and necessities, would inevitably result in the maximum sentence. "The system doesn't take kindly to parents who view their own offspring as caged commodities," she said grimly. "We'll see they're made examples of." I could only nod, ignoring the unsettling relish in her tone. Personal feelings aside, Martha was a ruthless ally in this fight, and I wasn't about to argue with results. For his part, Eli remained a subdued shadow throughout the proceedings. Despite our best efforts, he shied away from counseling and group activities, haunted eyes downcast whenever Tristan or Nadia's names arose. "It's going to take time for those wounds to heal," Dale cautioned whenever I fretted over the boy's withdrawal. And rationally, I knew he was right. Overcoming the trauma and emotional scarring inflicted by one's own parents couldn't be undone overnight. But that comprehension did little to ease the mounting guilt and worry gnawing at my heart. Had I failed Eli by not recognizing the signs sooner? All these years of missing holidays and birthdays, could I ever make that up to him now? The answers didn't come easily. But bit by bit, through patience and stubborn determination on both our parts, the walls began to show hairline cracks. It started small. Eli timidly agreeing to color with me one quiet afternoon, while Dale watched his loud courtroom shows, as oblivious to our bonding as ever. From there, we progressed to games of Go Fish and Crazy Eights, my genuine laughter at his horrendous bluffing faces earning the first tiny quirks of his lips. Before long, laughter and chattiness seeped back into the house like a palliative balm after the rolling darkness. I introduced Eli to swimming, his initial trepidation melting into uninhibited glee as he cut through the waters with strong, sure strokes. An art class yielded the first vibrant, unrestrained streaks of color across fresh canvases, and through it all, the fragile bond between us grew stronger with each new smile, each peal of laughter replaying in my mind like a soothing melody. The boy I'd feared was too wounded to recover, blossomed with each day of freedom from his parents' toxic influence. There were still bad days, of course. triggers that sent Eli retreating into a pensive shell of himself for hours or even days at a time. But we weathered those storms together, side by side, and emerged stronger for it in the end. On one such day, the sun had long since set beyond the den's picture windows before Eli stirred from his hunched position on the couch. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled over and wordlessly crawled into my lap, nestling against me in a contented silence. My breath caught as my arms instinctively folded around his small frame, marveling at the implicit trust in his actions. Setting my chin atop his tousled curls, I let out a shaky sigh, gathering the shreds of composure that loneliness and fresh memories of Tristan's cruelty had frayed. In that moment, gently rocking my grandson, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Him from that haunted, hollowed-out husk I'd first beheld in the closet, and me from the guilt-racked woman tormented over failing to prevent his suffering, holding this quietly content child bruised but not broken by the ugliness he'd endured, filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than I'd ever known. Scars would remain, but they didn't have to define him or me. All that mattered now was nurturing the resilience and fighting spirit, persevering against all odds. And that was a battle I vowed silently into the stillness, that I would fight beside him every single day until my last breath. The night of the sentencing hearing was one I'll never forget. Tristan and Nadia were led in wearing matching orange jumpsuits, hands and feet shackled. Where Nadia had her head bowed in sullen defeat, Tristan met my gaze head-on, with undisguised hatred burning in his eyes. I returned it with a look of cold indifference. He no longer had any power to rattle me. Martha stood ramrod straight beside us, lips pressed into a thin line of grim satisfaction as the judge entered. She'd cautioned us against expecting the maximum sentences, but her reputation preceded her. I had a feeling the so-called justice system wouldn't dare cross her. And I was right. After a mercifully brief recounting of the relevant facts, the hammer came down harder than I dared hope. For the crimes of child abuse, neglect, fraud, and embezzlement against a minor child's trust fund, I sentence you both to 15 years imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Nadia swayed on her feet as if struck, complexion going deathly pale. But my eyes were locked on Tristan, drinking in the dismay and impotent fury twisting his features into an ugly rictus. Additionally, you will be compelled to make full restitution of the stolen funds to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne upon your release. Failure to comply will result in an extension of your sentences. Martha's shark-like smile was triumphant as she caught my eye amid the courtroom din, mouthing, "I told you so." She'd played her gambit flawlessly, as always. Tristan was still yelling his outrage as he was hauled away, vitriol spewing from his lips. But the hatred in his eyes when they met mine burned itself into my memory, searing and indelible. I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching away, because in the end, he and Nadia were the ones vanquished, beaten at their own twisted game by the family whose bond they'd tried to shatter. It was a lesson I hoped haunted their every waking moment behind bars. Eli watched the whole proceeding in numb silence. I ached to pull him close, to shield him from the ugliness being laid so cruelly bare. But he was no longer a scared little boy. He'd borne witness to the depths of human cruelty and prevailed through courage and resilience. This was closure, plain and simple. One last look at the monsters who'd tried so viciously to break him before leaving them behind forever. The drive home passed in a blur, none of us speaking. What words could encapsulate the profound shift this day signified? It was Eli who finally broke the heavy silence as we pulled up to the house, fixing me with those serious green eyes that had seen far too much darkness for one so young. "I'm glad it's really over," he murmured. "That they got what they deserved, you know." I reached across the bench seat to squeeze his hand. "Me too, honey. It's all over now." The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of press, legal wrangling, and celebration from friends and family over our hard-won justice. But the moment that stood out most vividly was Eli's first art show at his new school. He'd been champing at the bit to show me his latest masterpieces, brimming with the pride and excitement of any kid his age. And finally, on opening night, I got to bask in the brilliant splashes of color and rebirth he'd committed to canvas. Each one was a searing reflection of the journey that led us here. Dark, muted tones juxtaposed against explosions of vibrant life. harsh lines fracturing then melding back together in a mosaic of regeneration. Wordless stories of tragedy and redemption laid bare in acrylic strokes, more poignant than any writer could capture. "That one there is how I felt for a long time," Eli explained, gripping my hand as we moved from canvas to canvas. His voice was contemplative, worlds away from the hollow echoes I'll never unhear from that closet. Scared, sad, like everything was cracking apart into pieces that I couldn't fix. He paused before a canvas emblazoned with a brilliant phoenix taking flight, wings unfurling in a blaze of crimson and gold. But this one is us now, rising up out of all the ugliness and hurt to start over, finding the color and beauty in life on the other side of the storm. Does that make sense? I pulled him close, blinking back tears of fierce pride and wonder at the resilient, insightful young man he was blossoming into. Another example of the tenacity with which new life can spring from unimaginable darkness. "It makes perfect sense," I murmured into his hair. Because in that moment, bathed in the kaleidoscopic rebirth of his art, I saw the first rays of the new dawn we'd both fought so hard to reach. And as I held him, surrounded by this latest rebirth, one truth became startlingly clear. We would meet each fresh challenge rise over the horizon together, standing united before whatever storms lay ahead. Mother and grandson soldiering onwards into the light.